Okay, good evening to another talk at the Kent Freedom Movement. Tonight is going to be another interesting one, always a controversial topic, 9/11. It was the first thing that started to wake me up as to what was going on in the world. And we've got the 11th anniversary coming up on Tuesday, September the 11th, and that happens to be Tuesday the same day of the week that it actually happened, so let's hope nothing actually happens again. We've got Andrew Johnson here from checktheevidence.com, and he's going to give what some consider very controversial version of what happened on that day. It seems fairly convincing to me, but let's wait and see. So without further ado, Andrew Johnson.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll move over here a bit for the camera. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, and particularly those that have come a long way. You've seen my initial screen for a bit, so hopefully this will allow me to click on to the next bit of the thing with any luck. What I wanted to show you was just that I've got DVDs on the table over there at the back. I sell the DVDs 50p each. I've got some copies of my book, 9/11 Finding the Truth, which you can download for free off the internet, or if you have a Kindle, you can get a Kindle version for free, and if you have an iPad, you can get an iPad version for free as well. So I've purely produced the paperback version for those that want a paperback book, and unfortunately I can't give away paperback books free, so you have to pay about £8 for it. So I've got 3 or 4 copies here tonight of this book, and this basically will tell you the backstory to this presentation, that book, 9/11 Finding the Truth. And I've also got 4 copies of Dr. Judy Wood's book, which this presentation is centred around, well, not the book itself, but the evidence within the book. And this is a 500-page science textbook about what happened to the World Trade Center. It's the only forensic scientific analysis available of what happened to the World Trade Center, and the US government paid $16 million for theirs, but it was false, it was fraudulent, and we can prove that it was fraudulent in multifarious ways. This one will cost the US government £25 if they wanted to buy it, or $40. So it's a bargain really, if you ask me. But we're going to start.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the Free University, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
So that was President Eisenhower speaking to the US nation in 1961, saying some very peculiar things. A government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. What is this military-industrial complex and it gaining power? What was he referring to? And what's this scientific technological elite that he referred to? Well, folks, it is preventing you from having access to technology which would transform this world completely. And instead, what that hidden scientific technological elite has done is turn that technology into a weapon. And that weapon was used to destroy the World Trade Center on 9/11. And that's what I'm here to tell you about. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I currently work part-time for the Open University. I assess disabled students for access to higher education for a grant called the DSA. And I do a little bit of tuition for the Open University on a course called Computers and Processors, because my background is actually in software engineering. Okay? So I'm not a geopolitical commentator. I've got discs out there about health and cancer and things. I'm not a doctor, you know. So you shouldn't really believe anything I say, basically. But to acquire knowledge, one must study. To acquire wisdom, one must observe. And what you're going to see in the first half of this presentation, really, are the observations of Dr. Judy Wood, which is contained in her book. And on a DVD we've got, you can see the expanded section of this first half on a DVD there, 50 pence. And it will change your life. It will change your worldview completely. What I'm going to look at tonight, I'm going to look at some preliminary 9/11 truth issues. We're going to look at how I became involved with 9/11 truth activities. We've got a very brief overview of that. We're going to have a look at evidence of media fakery on and before 9/11. We're going to have a look at evidence which indicates there were no large plane crashes at the World Trade Center. We're going to look at the evidence for the use of some type of directed energy weapon which destroyed most of the World Trade Center. That's one of the central bits of this. We're going to look at links between the energy cover-up, why you haven't got fuelless, free, infinite energy in your homes. You've got this rubbish, polluting, destructive energy which comes from fossil fuels and so on. There is actually an explanation for why things are like that, at least partly, within the secret of 9/11. The secret that no one will tell you and the 9/11 truth movement will not talk about. And I can prove to you that it won't talk about it by what I've got in this presentation. Whether you believe it, of course, is up to you. Evidence that there is an active, ongoing effort to cover up and discredit research into the directed energy weapons and no planes, and some of those individuals undertaking that activity. So I will be naming specific people tonight, and there are more, many more than I have time to name tonight, which I've got evidence of what they're up to. So am I some kind of CIA op? Am I some kind of MI5 agent? Well, you're going to have to do your own research and find that out for yourselves, aren't you? But you can send me any email, you can ring me up, the website, my name and address is on my website. You can ring me up at any reasonable time and I'll talk to anyone, as you will find other people have done. So, but I must start off by saying that unlike Dr. Judy Wood, I used to believe the official story of 9/11. It was up until about 2004 that I believed it. I bought the whole thing. But over time I learned how governments lie to a far greater extent than even heavy-hitting journalists like John Pilger, Greg Palast, and those guys, all those guys that have been on TV, will state publicly. John Pilger won't talk about what happened on 9/11, not really. He might say the US has got an aggressive foreign policy which has been induced by 9/11 or something like that, but he won't tell you what actually happened. Up until September the 11th, the scale of false flag attacks was much smaller. We had attacks on the USS Cole, we had things like the Vietnam War, which was essentially started by a small-scale false flag attack which never took place. And there were attacks on embassies and so forth to get countries into various conflicts. But September the 11th was on a different scale. And you can see this this sort of caption that somebody's done with the Native Americans. They were terrorised as well by the settlers. So I think most people in this room have probably looked at some of the areas that I'm going to talk about. So you've probably come to realise that the official story of 9/11 is an illusion. But how do we find out the extent of the deception? Are there layers of deception set up and managed by the people who did 9/11 to hide the truth for as long as possible? In other words, once you think you've got to the truth with there being bombs in the building, is that the true story? Well, I can tell you, no, it definitely is not, and I used to believe it. So I was caught up in the official story for 2 or 3 years, and then I was caught up in this bombs in the building and other versions of that story for another couple of years, and that's what I've written about in my book. Can those of us who know that World Trade Center 1 and 2 and 7 were not destroyed by planes, it had nothing to do with plane crashes, jet fuel and gravity, have been fooled more than once? Perhaps it is unsettling to consider that the answer to that question might be yes. Now, I've got this little picture as an example here, which I came across a few years ago. And you think, oh, that's quite an interesting picture. Not quite sure whether it's a photograph or, some photorealistic painting. And you think, oh, it's quite a slightly cold appearance and so on, but there's actually more information in this picture than you might at first realise. So I'm sure some people in the audience will have seen it. I'm going to skip to the next slide to show you. You can't help but see it, but initially you probably never saw the shape of the baby drawn out in the branches of the trees. Okay, I'll go back to the picture so you can see it. And you can see there's the foot, here's the eye, the nose. It's more sort of fetal baby. It's not like a big, newborn baby. It's more in a sort of fetal position. But once you've seen that picture now, most of the people in that room will remember that there is a baby in that picture. In other words, once you've seen the pattern in the data, a new picture emerges. There is more information in there than you at first realised. And you've decoded it because you made a particular set of observations like the foot and the hand and the nose and so on. And that's what I found with my research into 9/11. As I've found out more, gathered more data, seen more patterns, I've begun to work out, for example, that the 9/11 cover-up is directly linked to the energy cover-up. And I'll show you that. In order to find the truth about something, you should spend as much time as you can examining pertinent evidence before deciding on a conclusion. So you don't just say, oh, well, I think World Trade Center was destroyed with dynamite, because it looked like that. You actually have to break it down from that. You don't decide on the explanation and go and look for evidence to support it. You should start off with the evidence and go forward from there. I have been attempting to collect information and evidence related to 9/11 since about August 2004. And as I alluded to earlier on, some of my initial conclusions have changed when I've seen new evidence. Remember, court cases, investigations, etc. are sometimes reopened and appeals are drawn up when new evidence comes to light. You find that certain evidence disproves that somebody is guilty or a crime was committed in a different way to the one that was always assumed. By studying the evidence carefully, we can have a better chance of saying with certainty what did not happen. Even if we can't always say exactly what did happen. In other words, I can tell you, for example, that those objects which hit the World Trade Center, even though they looked like planes, they weren't planes. They were not real planes. I don't know exactly what they were, but I can tell you for sure that they were not planes. And I'll go through that. It's up to you whether you believe me, of course. But from my knowledge of physics and the evidence that is available, it wasn't planes that struck the towers. People who are not familiar with physical laws and how they dictate what is and is not possible in our 3D physical reality can be more easily fooled by illusions. So I have a basic knowledge of physics. I did physics as part of my degree. I did a degree in computer science and physics. So I'm familiar, for example, with Newton's third law, which is to every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And if you take that in the plane issue, the plane hits the building with the same force as the building hits the plane. Why are planes made of light materials and aluminium? So that they fly. Are light materials and aluminium what you make a building out of? A 210-storey building out of? No. Because if you made a building out of light materials and aluminium, it would fall apart and blow down in the wind. That's why structural steel, is hundreds of times harder than quarter-inch aluminium wing struts. And yet, on 9/11, as I'll show you, we saw quarter-inch aluminium wing struts cut through multiple steel girders. It's not physically possible. It is not physically possible. It doesn't matter what stories you hear on the internet about hijacked planes, drones, missiles. The basic fact is that the holes in the buildings could not physically have been created by planes. It doesn't end there. So that's one example. You've also got to look at people's behaviour, because I've now proved in my book that there are people set out to collect information about people looking at all this stuff, and they form groups and they collect information about those groups and they try and steer those groups in certain directions. And I was part of one of those groups, and I was steered for a while in a certain direction, but then I worked out what was going on and I basically told them to get lost, and they've written about that. Many of the photos used here have been found and posted by Dr. Judy Wood. The pictures Dr. Wood has found and posted tell a rather different story from that told in various 9/11 articles, books and films. Like Alex Jones talks about drones and planes. He talks about nanothermite. He talks about mini-nukes. If you actually look at all the pictures, which some people claim are not available, they tell a different story, and they actually tell you what happened, funnily enough. And some people think that NIST have kept all the interesting photographs and videos for themselves. This is not true. In fact, a couple of years ago we had an ABC News story which says, new pictures from 9/11 now posted under a Freedom of Information Act request. That story was completely untrue, because those pictures have been on Judy Wood's website, or a bulk of them, for about 3 or 4 years. So we knew that on its face that story was completely untrue, because we actually had the pictures that, which they said had been kept secret since 9/11. It's false. Okay, so my involvement in this. I became suspicious in 2003 that 9/11 was something wrong with it. I woke up in 2004, organised a small film show of George Humphrey's 9/11 The Great Illusion, and 2 people turned up for that. Huge success for me. Wrote letters to MPs, the Home Office, in late 2004, early 2005, and those letters are on the website somewhere, I think. I saw the Jimmy Walter and William Rodriguez event in London in May 2005. I organised an event for David Shayler and Annie Machon to speak in December 2005, and we showed the Loose Change film. We filled a cinema at Derby, one of the independent cinemas, got about 100 people there. That was quite a big success at the time. I was invited to join this group, Scholars for 9/11 Truth, which claimed to be a group of academics looking into and getting a new inquiry going into 9/11. I joined that. I was invited to join that, actually, in December 2005. I organised 2 events for William Rodriguez. He's the janitor that supposedly survived the destruction of the towers. I'm pretty sure from the evidence I've gathered that he, again, was one of these people who set out to lead people in a certain direction. His story might be true. I don't really think it is true. It could be true, though. And he basically accused Dr. Judy Wood and Morgan Reynolds of putting out disinformation, and those were the only 2 people that he named. And he did that in interviews that I helped him get to. I had an article published in the Open University faculty magazine called Society Matters in August 2007. To my knowledge, it is the only article published in any UK academic publication anywhere in the UK which seriously questions the official story of 9/11. As to my knowledge, there may be another one, but it's the only one. And you can still read it in that edition if you want online on the Open University's website. So I was quite pleased about that. And I've given out thousands of DVDs. I think I'm up to about, probably since 2004, I've probably given out somewhere in the region of 40,000 DVDs, something like that, by various methods. Thanks so much. There's various topics though, and it's not all my own work, it's just getting the stuff out there. So I must acknowledge these people: Dr. Judy Wood, Morgan Reynolds. I know this is a bit of a long intro, but I want to give you a good sort of thorough background, really. Rosalie Grable is one of the planes researchers. I also must mention Richard D. Hall, who some of you are familiar with. He's been a huge, without his help, this information would not have got out there, and I think probably many people in the room have come to this through Richard D. Hall's programme and his support. And he's also done this marvellous 3D analysis, which I'll mention later, which he published earlier this year, which is fantastic. But I do not speak for Dr. Wood, I don't speak for Dr. Reynolds, I don't speak for Richard Hall, I only speak for me. Right? So, just bear that in mind. I'm not claiming to speak for anyone except my own experience and what I'm going to show you in terms of pictures. Okay, so we're going to look at events before 9/11. And we're going to look at other what are called false flag events. False flag is commit an atrocity, then blame it on somebody else and frame them. For example, in the playground, you kick the ball through a window and then you blame it on your mate. You've done a false flag on your mate. It's one way of looking at it if you don't know what the expression is. It was him. But people don't realise that actually this is a hugely powerful tool in advancing a political agenda. You don't think of it in that context because basically we consider that politicians are basically honest. They might fiddle the books occasionally, but they ain't going to commit mass murder, and then blame it on somebody else. But then you find when you look at 9/11, oh yes, they do that. Not as normally as a political group, but as some type of secret group, quite often. And people talk about this, and I do think this factors into this in some way. The PNAC document, it's not something I talk about a lot. People like Ian Crane tend to go into more detail about this, but I'll mention it here in case you've not heard of it. You can access a document called Rebuilding America's Defences, which was by a group which was sort of behind the Bush administration, but this was before the Bush administration came to power, if I'm not mistaken. No, in fact, yeah, I think probably was a bit before, but anyway, that's less important. On page 63 it says, the process of transformation of the US military, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalysing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, which is rather odd, because this was about 9 months before 9/11. And then this comes up as well. Alex Jones talks about this a lot. Operation Northwoods, uncovered by James Bamford. This was a plan to rally support for an attack on Cuba by creating a staged attack on American citizens and blame it on Cuba. But I've now had a question raised about this document, and there's another web page analysing this document. It's quite interesting, because was this document released to get people to think in terms of remote-controlled planes? Because that's what's suggested in here, and that's why Alex Jones talks about it, I think, because he likes to talk about remote-controlled planes. And we're not looking at remote-controlled planes, as I'll get to. Some have commented that the language in this document is inconsistent. In fact, they use the word holiday, students being on holiday, I think is the expression, rather than on vacation, which is the American expression. And there is another website about this. I haven't had a chance to link it into this presentation, but it's quite interesting. So again, was that released to lead people down a certain path? The ones that were asking the questions about 9/11? Possibly. Maybe even certainly. Now we're going to look at the events on 9/11. Briefly, and this is a quick run through some of the stuff that Dr. Woods put together. Only buildings with a WTC prefix were completely destroyed on 9/11. And oh no, it wasn't 3 towers that were destroyed, it was 7 buildings which were destroyed. All of them were gone by the aftermath. So the first thing that I need to bring your attention to, for those that haven't looked at this closely, the World Trade Center towers collapsed. We've just seen Building 1 collapse. All the news reports said it. We've seen Building 7 collapse. And apparently one Liberty Plaza was supposed to have collapsed about 3 times. You can even find reports of a building that didn't actually collapse had collapsed. This word collapse. Well, Dr. Wood came forward with this, and I thought, oh wow, maybe that's I better think about this a bit more, because particularly what she observed here is this black building on the left is called the Bankers Trust, and I'll mention this again later. That's 40 stories high. So if you look at the line of sight, you can see the bottom of that sort of cloud of material is roughly 40 stories off the ground. So how high is the World Trade Center? 110 stories? So that means that we have 70 stories of building, of the debris must be, because this bit of building is still intact. So are the 70 stories of building contained within this, Dr. Wood calls it a snowball? I mean, I'm not saying there are or there aren't, I'm just asking you to think about it at this point. And you notice that this sort of strange fuming effect below. And this picture is particularly revealing. Now, looking at that, do you think, well, let's see, is that building exploding? Is it falling down? Can we see these big pieces of sort of metal and things? No, I think that's actually turning to dust before our very eyes. I think that's actually what happened. So this building, we've already got a problem, because this building is turning to dust before our very eyes, and you're going to see it again here. You're going to see this building turning to dust, hopefully, if this clip plays. just move this pointer. And if you look carefully here, you can actually see some of these pieces of steel. This one, there's one, in fact, we're going to see it more clearly on this. But some of these pieces of steel turn to dust as they are falling. This is 70 stories of unsupported steel. Watch what happens to it. All the building's gone. We've got about, what, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, and it's gone. What the hell is going on? That's 70 stories of steel, and then it's gone. Can you see any explosions? Can you see any bright flashes from nuclear devices going off? Can you see hot orange, yellow flames shooting out? Can you see sparks flying off in all directions? Well, excuse me, I can't see any of those things. So maybe I'm blind, maybe it's just my lying eyes. But it looks pretty much to me as if those buildings are turning to dust. And that very fact on its own, you can observe this for yourself, go and look at other videos, look at it from other angles. I've been looking at this for 4 years, and I've had to confront the reality that that building is turning to dust. And there is no mechanism that I know of on this planet that's been disclosed to me in a public arena that can cause that to happen. And this is in broad daylight on the morning of September the 11th, 11 years ago. People didn't even notice it because it was such a horrific spectacle to see. And when people were in a state of shock and trauma and disbelief, there, watch it go. It's not dust that's settled out of the main building. That is steel turning to dust before your very eyes. And a lot of it. That's the clearest shot because you've got blue sky in the background. I've since seen more footage of this. So somebody's got some explaining to do. And up until this point, there are many people that have tried to unexplain that, but only one person who has given an explanation for that event, and that's Dr. Judy Wood. Still image sequence. This is not from the video, this is a separate camera. So you decide for yourselves. I've decided for myself what is happening. Is it exploding? Is it burning down? Has it been caused by a jet fuel fire? Or is it still simply turning to dust before your very eyes? And I'm going to show you the evidence which tells you exactly what's going on with that. And it's an energy weapon. People talk about building number 7 as well being a controlled demolition. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, no, it's true they talk about it, sorry.
It's true that they talk about it, correct, sorry. Is that what really happened, I suppose, is what I should ask the question, to rephrase my question. It's a very, very interesting aftermath, because if this was a controlled demolition with bombs, in the traditional sense, as people like Alex Jones claim, then the debris pile went hardly across the street. This is the building across the street, and this is the 47-storey building that's gone down, and it hasn't even touched this building. It's incredible. And what you'll find is that if you go and look at the seismic record, in other words, the ground shaking, there was no seismic record for that building going to the ground. It's virtually indistinguishable from background noise. In other words, the building didn't hit the ground in solid form, and neither did the towers for that matter. There was a 2.6, I think, for one of them and 2.3 for the other. Next bit of evidence, well, we saw the steel turning to dust. If you agree with me, you can make your own observation later if you wish. I'm going to tell you that it turned to dust because I'm pretty sure that's what it did. This building here, that's building number 7. The one we just saw in the previous picture before it was destroyed. Does anyone know what time building 7 was destroyed on 9/11? It was about 6 hours later, about 5:20 in the evening. The reason why I point that out is that we now know that this picture here with this fireman standing in the middle ground there was taken before 5:20 in the evening. Must have been, because building 7 is still there. So we can clearly put a period of time when that picture was taken. But if you look at this picture, it's probably taken about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The shadows are very short. It looks like the sun's overhead. So probably 12:30, 1, half 2, something like that. Sometime around then. So, excuse me, but this was the remains of one of the 4th tallest building. In fact, there were 2 of them two of the fourth tallest buildings in the world in this space here. And we've got, let's see, a sort of height of rubble there. And that in the background is an 8-storey building. And that's quite a way back. So we haven't even got a pile that's 1 story high. So we've got some explaining to do here. The title of Dr. Wood's book is, not surprisingly, Where Did the Towers Go? Where did the towers go? It's a very, very simple question, one which nobody wants to answer. Oh look, I told you before, everyone talks about Towers 1, 2 and 7. What about the other buildings? This is World Trade Center 6. Completely destroyed. The centre, if you look in there, you can see other pictures, it's completely gone. But there's very little debris in the bottom of it. The whole centre section of that building has been taken out. Yet this is completely pristine and undamaged. That's the World Financial Centre. Didn't have a WTC prefix. So that's a quick overview of some of the pictures. I've got a few more later, which I'm going to come back to. But I want you to know that I got involved because of the physics. And I realised in 2004, thanks to George Humphrey's film, that we got the anomalous fall time of the building. And I worked this out. I calculated this because it's a very simple equation. I knew that the towers were 1,350 feet high approximately, or 1,362 and 1,368 to give the exact figures. And they supposedly collapsed, you see there's this word again, which is the wrong word, in 10 seconds and 8 seconds. But the problem for the official story believers is that the towers were of an extremely strong construction. You've got 47 enormous interior columns and 236 exterior columns. Okay? Some of you might be familiar with this. Where did all that go? What happened to it? How were all those supports cut? These were the over-engineered buildings. Well, if you go onto the BBC website, and it was there last time I checked, and we did this on Richard Hall's programme, what the BBC will tell you is that fire reaches 800 degrees centigrade, hot enough to melt steel floor supports. So that's where they get you. They tell you it's hot enough to melt steel floor supports. Well, two problems with that. Factually incorrect. And it has been that for over 5 years now. Steel melts at 1500, so the figure is wrong. But not only that, steel didn't melt. It turned to dust, as I already showed you. So they're lying twice over. The BBC are lying twice over just on that page, because they're not telling you what actually happened. Because they've injected this false story and stuck to it. They did that half an hour after the thing happened. Okay, so you can actually, I won't read all this out, but you can basically work out what the collapse time should be from this equation, S equals ut plus a half at squared, which then becomes S equals a half at squared because the initial velocity is 0. And then you can work this out from the height of the towers and the acceleration due to gravity. If there's anybody in the room who does maths, they'll be able to follow this. So you could basically work out that the fall time for the towers would be 9.16 seconds. So it was close to free fall. So these buildings fell through themselves as quickly as they would fall through air. That was what appeared. So in other words, it's like the building wasn't even there when it fell, which is actually what happened. So, and Dr. Judy Wood has got this wonderful billiard ball example where she considers each floor disappearing after a break of 1 second. So she points out that if each floor had disappeared in 1 second, which is not unreasonable, if you think about it, it would have taken 110 seconds for the towers to go from the top to the bottom, which is over a minute. It's nearly 2 minutes, in fact. So if you consider that, then you can begin to realise how quickly they went away. I'm not going to say collapse now, I'm going to try and avoid that word. Okay, so and I posted that explanation on a forum, right? On a physics forum. I went onto a physics forum. Let's go and find some physicists. Let's see if, my thinking is correct on this one. And I put it on a physics forum and I said, hang on, so here's my calculation, what's wrong with it then? Where have I gone wrong? Because we know that towers don't just disappear. And that page attracted thousands of responses, and it ran for about 18 months. But I think it was because I'd started this physics forum thread and they thought I knew what I was talking about. Well, I did know what I was talking about. I got invited into the Scholars for 9/11 Truth group, and that was in 2005, December. And I began to post on their forum in January or February 2006. And I helped Stephen E. Jones, who's this physicist from Brigham Young University, who I'll talk about before too long, in a bit more detail. Because this Stephen E. Jones character connects us into the energy question, which I'll cover. I made a DVD of his USVC presentation, which was given in February 2006, and I started to give copies out because I assumed this is a physicist. He's a PhD. He's done work in various areas of nuclear physics, so he knows what he's talking about. He's an honest guy, so he must know what he's talking about. And I also gave copies of a guy called Kevin Ryan's DVD. I assumed that Scholars for 9/11 Truth would gain some traction and take some action. Stephen E. Jones published this paper, Why Indeed Did the Twin Towers Collapse? Why indeed did the Twin Towers collapse? Well, I later came to realise they didn't collapse. So Jones was doing it as well. He was saying when they collapsed, and they didn't collapse. They turned to dust. He made a few revisions to this paper. He didn't revise the title, though. He put completely collapse, actually. He changed it later. A few articles were posted by Gordon Ross, blah, 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 a few other people. Dr. Wood's billiard ball example was rarely discussed. It was so simple, but her work was kept off the forum. People attacked it. But it was much simpler than Jones's work. Anyone could understand it. When you looked at it, it looked complicated because it had a sort of graph and some balls and lines and stuff. But when you actually listened to what it was saying, it's actually very simple. Same with the book. You can pick that book up and think, crikey, this looks complicated. But you'll find when you actually read it, it's very straightforward. I started to get more interested in the articles by Dr. Reynolds and Wood, who were also members of Scholars for 9/11 Truth. That's how I came into contact with Judy Wood originally. And they actually wrote an article which mentioned my name. And I thought, oh, why are these people mentioning my name? And I'll come to that shortly. And as I reviewed the evidence, I became more concerned that Stephen E. Jones were ignoring important things that Reynolds and Wood were saying. They knew what they were talking about and they were being ignored. At first I thought, well, this doesn't really matter, and I still get this now. It doesn't really matter whether it was energy weapons, or it doesn't matter whether it was bombs, it doesn't matter whether it was thermite. None of that matters, because all we've got to tell people is that the official story is false. That's all we need to do. No, that's not what we need to do. If we're going to find the truth of 9/11, we don't just replace one lie with another. In other words, when we know that it wasn't bombs in the building, and we know that it wasn't thermite, we tell people that. And you don't say, oh, Andrew, I'm sorry, but this energy weapon, people are not going to believe it. I believe you, Andrew, but people are not going to believe it. So you shouldn't tell them. So it is difficult to take in, but I know that it's true. Right? So I have two choices. I can make up a different story and tell them a different story, or I can say to them, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but it's the truth. So what would you do? That's a rhetorical question. So I began corresponding with Dr. Judy Wood, I think in 2007, late 2006. I'll come back to that. But now I want to look at media fakery, because you've sort of seen how the towers turned to dust, but some of you probably never even realised. It depends on how things are presented to you. But we'll look at how things are presented.
U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush pushes for a land war against Iraq. But polls show the U.S. public is split 50-50 on that idea. Then comes this eyewitness testimony before a congressional committee from a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl. The claim is she cannot be identified for fear of reprisals.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
The U.S. public is outraged. The result? Support for land war zooms. It's a turning point. Desert Storm is launched. 135,000 Iraqis are killed. An estimated 1 million Iraqis, many of them children and old people, then die as a result of 10 years of sanctions. One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths. Not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. It's one phase in a $10 million joint U.S.-Kuwaiti campaign of deception. This man is lying.
I myself buried 14 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
This man is lying.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
There were a lot of people who participated in a conspiracy. Yes, an out-and-out conspiracy.
So the point of showing that clip is that that story was made up and put into the media, the Iraqi babies in incubators, to achieve a certain outcome. An example of media fakery, a fake story is put into the media. And this goes on and on. We had a very recent one. I should probably update this, because the most famous recent one was when they had the supposed liberation of Libya and the people cheering in this square and waving flags, and they were waving an Indian flag because this video had come from India and not from Libya. And that was put out on primetime BBC. And a lot of people obviously were more observant than I, because I wouldn't have known the difference between an Indian flag and a Libyan flag. But there were people, and I don't watch the news anyway, but there were people more observant than me picked that out, and they were straight on it. And another one is, people are not familiar with this so much. The Zapruder film, the Zapruder film, which is the famous film of JFK getting his head blown off, is actually doctored. The one that everyone sees has been doctored, and frames have been deleted from it. I'll show you an example of this. What we've got here are some frames from the Zapruder film, and this has been termed a fast-forward mistake. And if you watch this very carefully in the lower two clips, this is John Costello's analysis, it's not my analysis. There's a website called Assassination Science, which unfortunately is connected to Jim Fetzer, which I'll come back to, but I have to mention his name to be fair to this piece of the research, because I still think this research is valid. But if you look at what's happening here, I won't read out all the text, you can see that this lady here, she moves her head too quickly in part of the footage. She turns her head far more quickly than it's possible to do with a real, human motion. And even more quickly is the secret agent at the front, or the Secret Service guy, whatever is, or the guy next to the driver. If you watch carefully, you'll see that his head snaps extremely quickly from a backwards position to a forwards position. I'll leave that up for a few seconds so you can watch it. Just watch where the yellow arrows are pointing, and you'll see it. So you can actually see there that if you measure these movements frame by frame and then work out the speed based on the dimensions and so on, people can't turn this fast. It's physically impossible. There's another mistake in this film in that what you see in this frame is apparently the front of Kennedy's head getting hit and blood spattering out, which is going in the wrong direction, and then supposed sort of stuff coming out here. She doesn't get the blood on her though, apparently. But the biggest problem with that is the photographs which came later, where this shows him being hit in the head, but the autopsy photographs show no head wound. It was a neck wound. So the point was that either the autopsy photographs were fake, or the Zapruder film was fake, or both of them were fake. It didn't match up. So that was with Kennedy's assassination. So in other words, all this generated false information is put out into the media, and the Zapruder film wasn't released for a year after Kennedy's assassination. It didn't come out until 1964. It was never shown until the public until then. It came out as part of Jim Garrison's case, I believe. Okay, so I think there's some kind of fakery went on with the plane issue on 9/11. In fact, I know it did. Now, there's been arguments about what actually caused this, and my views have changed slightly, which again I'll get into literally in the last year, really. I think there was some media fakery, but behind it also there is another technology involved. Of that I'm now fairly certain. Now, what am I saying here? No big burns at the World Trade Center? Well, of course, Andrew, that's ridiculous. Everyone saw them. People reported seeing them, didn't they? All these witnesses saw them. I saw a plane come over. I saw it crash. You know, we saw it on all the videos. There's 54 videos showing planes. So it must have been planes, mustn't they? In fact, if you read Laura Knight Yadsik's book, she says, or it's Joe Quinn, I can't remember, most sincere 9/11 researchers agree that planes crashed at the World Trade Center. Most sincere. Well, I'm sorry, folks, I'm not a sincere 9/11 researcher because I do not agree that planes crashed at the World Trade Center. So if you read 9/11 Ultimate Truth by Laura Knight Yadsik and Joe Quinn, you will come away realising I'm not a sincere 9/11 researcher because I do not agree with what they say. So we all saw it, didn't we? We saw it on the Norday footage of the first impact, which didn't come out until the next day. We saw multiple videos. I think there are over 50. So what am I saying? What were these planes? Computer graphics injected later into news footage? Holograms? Now, I've been told by people, in fact, I was told this in 2006, I think. I shouldn't talk about this. Don't talk about it, Andrew. The public are never going to believe this idea of no planes. Don't talk about it. You'll damage the 9/11 Truth campaign. So it doesn't matter about evidence, all right, which is what I'm going to show you, and there's got it in spades. I haven't got to damage. The Truth campaign is more important than the evidence, folks. Just remember that. To find the truth, we have to keep looking at the evidence. So when you get new evidence, you get more evidence uncovered, you have to try and look at it, evaluate it, study it. Does it work? As Richard Feynman used to say, the famous physicist, what does the data say? Well, he's dead now, so you probably want to look at this. Let's have a look at this. Okay, right. Thank you very much. I can't take... I'm just going to play this telephone call now. I'll explain what it is.
Evening, can I help you?
Hi, could I speak to Michael Hezerkani, please?
Yeah, my name's calling, sir.
My name's Jeff.
Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, hold on, Jeff.
Thank you.
I'm coming in.
This is the guy who shot that video. The guy that speaks next.
Hello, Michael speaking.
Hi, Mr. Hezerkani.
Yeah?
My name's Jeffrey Hill.
Yes?
The reason I was calling you was because, weren't you the one who took the video of the plane hitting the tower on 9/11?
Yes, sir.
And, I was just wondering, I was just, doing, like, for a memorial of, the 9/11, I was putting together a little video. And I was just wondering, whereabouts were you when you took the video?
Who is this?
Jeffrey Hill.
From where?
I live in Canada. Sault Ste. Marie, Canada.
Uh-huh. And are you in the television?
No, I'm just a normal person. I was a student, and I was just doing a little film, mini film for a class.
Yeah, you have to call CNN and get that information. I'm not allowed to give anything else.
Well, were you working for CNN at the time you took it or something?
Just call them. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Hello, Mr. Hezerkani?
It's Michael speaking.
Hi, Mr. Hezerkani? This is Jeff again. I was just wondering, who exactly would I call at CNN to ask them anything?
They have all the rights to the video, and I don't, so I can't even talk to anybody about it. That's what my lawyer says, so I'm sorry, I can't even help you with that. And I wouldn't know who to talk to over there.
Oh, so you just took it and gave it to the CNN or something?
I can't even tell you that. Sorry.
Oh, so I would have to ask them. Like you wouldn't even be allowed to tell me where you were when you took the video?
Yeah, I can't even talk to you about it. I'm sorry. You talk to them. Okay?
Were you in Battery Park?
Call me again because I'm really busy. Thank you, bye-bye.
So that was the guy, it is claimed, who took that video, that monumental video of the second impact. That was him on the phone. He couldn't talk about the video. Why couldn't he talk about the video? Did he really shoot that video? Where did he take it from? We don't know. And there are other problems with I've showed that video highlighted a couple of problems with that plane crash, but there are many other issues. For example, this is claimed by the US government, and this is in this report, to be one of the bits of the plane that crashed. If we had this sort of huge conflagration of a fireball, how did this tyre survive like that? It's in pretty good shape. And Dr. Wood has analysed or looked at this part here, and it looks as if that has been cut through with a. It's not a shear force or a snapped thing. It's actually been cut through with a tool. It just looks like it's been dumped there. And then also she spotted this in one of the pictures. This is a bit difficult to see unless you really get up close and study it. But it appears that this piece of supposed fuselage, this was a picture taken on the 25th of October 9/11. 2001 I should say, after 9/11. It's actually not on this picture that was taken on the 13th. If you look at these pieces, you can actually match them up. This one ain't there. So it looks like that piece of fuselage has been planted on top of the building. And what are all these circular holes in the tops of World Trade Center 5? Maybe there's some clues there. But this is the big one, really. You can forget the other two almost that I showed you. How can aluminium and light materials crash through solid steel girders, please? What would happen if you fired a 0.44 Magnum bullet, which is denser and faster than the wing strut of a Boeing's wing, at a steel girder? Would it ricochet off it? Would it go through it, creating a nice perfect hole? You decide. But this is what we're told happened. 1/4-inch aluminium wing struts, I'm not talking about the engines and the fuselage, cut through multiple steel girders. Can you see a plane inside there, folks? Can you see any bits of plane wreckage? I'll go back to the unzoomed one. Can you see a bit of a tail, an aileron, a wing, a seat? Can you see any recognisable element of a plane hanging off the edge of the building? In that video I showed you previously, did you see any large pieces of plane breaking off and falling into the street? Bit of tail section? No. Nothing.
It seemed to be absorbed by the
Right, seemed to be absorbed by the building. Now, again, this has been hotly talked about, once you get into this, for the last few years. And I originally thought, and it still might be some truth in this, that some of the footage that was shown on 9/11 was doctored using computer graphics, Photoshop, possibly. And there's this film called September Clues, which I'd given out many copies of to people, and sold them at cost price. I sold the disc for 50p, which is close to my cost price. And I wondered if the plane oddities could be explained by fake video having been shown. However, over time I came to realise that it was again more complicated than it first appeared. Several researchers, Ace Baker, Simon Shack and Jeff Hill, who made the phone calls, who had developed or supported video fakery ideas and presentations, went on to attack or ridicule the idea that the towers turned to dust. And each of them have done this essentially. Each of these three researchers, Ace Baker did an analysis of video fakery. He said it was video fakery. Simon Shack created this film, September Clues. And Jeff Hill, who made all those phone calls, including the one I just played, have all gone on to attack Dr. Judy Wood. Every one of them, for her research. Which is all very strange, because her research doesn't really affect the plane issue. In fact, she says this herself. The buildings turned to dust. It doesn't really matter whether the planes were involved or not. They turned to dust. The planes didn't do it. So you can forget the whole plane issue. In fact, she only mentions it very briefly in her book, talking about the holes and extending on what I've just said. So in 2012, Richard D. Hall published a comprehensive video analysis of his own, which showed that the planes did appear to follow the correct path based on the radar data that was available. What I mean by that is, some people were claiming that because these video fakery was done, all these 50 videos wouldn't match up. So if you took the path of the plane on one video, it wouldn't match up on the path shown on another. And it does look like that. And in fact, in September Clues, it even shows you this, and it really does look as if that is the case. But Richard actually got the radar data from a report that was available, and he painstakingly, over about at least 6 months it took him, he plotted the video footage in a 3D Google SketchUp model. And you can see this. I've got some DVDs of this if you want to watch it. And he broadcast this earlier this year, and I went and did a recording with him. And what we came to the conclusion, essentially, was some type of image projection or hologram technology was used excuse me, to generate these supposed planes. Now, I know that's far out. I know you're going to say, well, that's just, where's the evidence for that? But that's what it looks like. If you look at the analysis, you look at what the witnesses saw, which I'll come on to, it appears, and in fact I've got a clip here, look at this. Is this a trick of the light? You decide. study those clips closely, you'll see there's a problem. In each of those clips, for a portion of frames, one of the wings disappears. In fact, in this one, I think both of them do. Is this just a reflection? Again, you're going to have to decide. Where's the wing gone? Here's the next one. This is it. I think you get clearer. There's the plane going in. I've zoomed into the portion. Oh, there goes the wing. It's disappeared. Now that should be fairly constant illumination, because you're seeing it. The sun is straight onto the building on the right. Where did the wing go? The wing disappeared. Some people reported seeing a small plane. Some people reported a large plane. That's just the original clips again. So my current conclusion on this, which is still a kind of work in progress, is that this whole idea of video fakery is the same as the bombs in the building story. It's meant to lead people away from technology actually being used to create the illusion. Because I think there is some holographic technology or something involved here. And you'll see more why I say that if you watch Richard D. Hall's film. But partly why I say this comes from the witness accounts, because in 2007 I completed a study of 500 witness accounts. Now, not a lot of people that I know will go to the New York Times website, see the list of 500 witness accounts from the Oral Histories Project, and download every single one of them, which is what I did. 500 PDF files, converted them all to text, and then did a text search on 500 files to see what I could find. And Dr. Judy Woods used some of those files in her book. So, obviously with computers, if you know what you're doing, you can get 500 files to be downloaded in a couple of minutes. I had a nice little program which allowed me to do that. And then I found another nice little program which allowed me to do word searches on those 500 files very quickly. So it took me about 2 weeks. But over that time, I established that there were 96 witnesses. I better explain what these witness accounts were. When the events happened, many first responders went down, emergency medical technicians, nurses, firemen and police, but the police weren't allowed to be interviewed for this case, and they gave accounts of actually what they saw and witnessed on the day, the people they rescued and so on, and those were given to the New York Times and the Oral Histories Project. And they basically described an account. Some of these accounts are like 20 pages long, some are 3 pages long, and they say where they were. I first saw it on the television, then I got to the truck and I went down to the site. When I got there, there was a command post, so I went to the command post and I was told where to go. And you can read all their accounts. And what I basically look for is I look for accounts that said, well, we started on West Street, that's where we first parked, and then I walked towards the World Trade Center, and I looked at the time. And basically I was able to establish that out of the 500, 96 witnesses were near the World Trade Center within half a mile. I looked at this on the map. At the time of the second impact, and a further 21 witnesses were inside one of the World Trade Center buildings at the time of the second impact. This gave a total of 117 witnesses who were near or inside the World Trade Center at the time of the second impact. Now, the peculiar thing was that only 19 of the witnesses near the World Trade Center reported actually seeing the plane 2 before impact. So only 20% of those witnesses saw the second plane. Now you might not think that's a reasonable number, because they would have been pulling people out of the wreckage and picking things up and picking their way through the debris that was there. The buildings have mainly come down by then. Only 20 of the witnesses reported actually hearing the plane, which I think is more unusual. You'd expect that they would at least hear it, even if they couldn't see it, when they're right next to the flipping tower. These things are louder than a rock concert. Boeing Jet's engine is louder than a rock concert. You're going to hear that when you're right next to the tower. 21% of the witnesses heard the second plane. Only 8 of the witnesses reported actually seeing and hearing the plane. Maybe there are a few more, but that's what was actually reported. So 8.3% of the witnesses saw and heard the second plane. And this Jim Fexer character, which I'm going to talk more about later, he congratulated me on this study because I'd been through all the data, I'd carefully gone through it, I compiled it and made a database. You can download this database if you want. It's all on my website, so you can download it and look through it yourself, see if you can find any more, revise my figures. Please do. But some of these accounts are really very strange, very strange. For example, from the account of this guy, Scott Hollowak, or I think that's how you pronounce it, file number 9110114. At that time, Chief Ganshi was behind me, and he thought there was another explosion in the North Tower. And that's when I turned around and said, Chief, listen, there is a second plane that hit the tower. He was like, no, 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 we have another explosion. I said, no, Chief, I witnessed it. I watched the plane hit the other tower. He's like, are you sure? I said, Chief, I'm 100% sure, because I watched the plane hit the other tower. So these two guys are stood next to each other, yet they can't agree that a plane was involved. Doesn't that strike you as odd? But it gets even more strange. Firefighter David Sandvik. We start heading down the block, and we get down to I guess about Church Street, and the second plane hit, and I remember just being underneath. I never heard the motor of the plane, the sound of the engines. We just heard the explosion. You felt the explosion. And looking straight up and seeing that fireball that you see on the news, but we're underneath, looking up at it now at it. Huh? He's right underneath the fireball. Doesn't hear the plane. It's a bit strange, isn't it? And you can actually, there are many of these accounts, if you go and read them, there's another one where, I think it's Patricia Ondrovich's account, which is in Dr. Wood's book. She said, oh, I didn't even know planes were involved until the next day. She was right there. So, some points, general points here about what I've shown you. There's a lot more detail that I haven't. The witness statements conflict. You can read conflicting witnesses. Some people say they saw a missile. Some people say they saw a big plane. Some people saw a small plane. Some people say they didn't know it was a plane until they saw it on television when they got home. The stories about the black box recovery, that all conflicts. No serial numbers of any plane parts recovered at the World Trade Center have ever been published. So there's no identified plane parts details have ever been published. So if planes did indeed crash, then all the video evidence should match perfectly, especially that from the main news outlets, CNN, ABC, and it doesn't. There are discrepancies, like wings disappearing at different points and stuff. And I haven't gone into the other sites, the Shanksville site and Pentagon, but there is other research which suggests that planes didn't crash there either. That was all made up. And in fact, the famous one is Jamie McIntyre of CNN. When he first reported it on CNN, they said, oh, here there's been a plane crash at the Pentagon. And he said, well, I see no evidence of a plane having crashed here. May look like that, but there's no evidence of a plane outside the building. And that was Jamie McIntyre, the CNN guy, said that. Same at Shanksville, there's a hole in the ground with some people walking around. The pathologist said there was nothing for him to do when he got there because there were no bodies, there was no blood. So, but if there were no planes, in fact all the plane crashes were an illusion, which I present to you, that's how it was. I've only presented part of the evidence. There were no hijackers. You can forget that whole story. They didn't exist. And in fact, Elias Davidson can find no evidence and no testimony that any of the ground staff ever saw any hijackers get on any of the planes. That's Elias Davidson's study. So there's no evidence that the hijackers got on the planes. All we've got is some CCTV footage from the 10th of September, the day before. Anomalies with the passengers can be explained because there are almost no families turning up at the airport, which is in September clues, to meet planes that should have landed. In other words, at LAX, where two of the flights were destined to go, when reporters went to meet the passengers, the families and friends of passengers, there was hardly anybody there. It's as if those flights really weren't coming into that airport. It explains the flight anomalies well, because there weren't real planes. It explains the surviving hijackers, which the BBC interviewed after the event, because they weren't hijackers. Nearly finished this section. It explains the fake NORAD tapes, because they're alleged to be fake. Well, if there were no real hijackings, then they had to fake the NORAD tapes. Operators were watching radar blips because of the military exercises. And it indicates there's another layer of the cover-up. And again, there's some of this in September clues, but I should really update this, because we should look at Richard Hall's ball analysis, 3D analysis. I should have updated this slide. The ball analysis was with the previous one that he did, because that also has some important information in it. Okay, so just a couple more things before we go to the interval. Here's a possible scenario for what happened on 9/11 regarding the planes. Quite a number of military exercises are going on, which has been written about by people like Webster Tarpley, who also attacked Judy Wood, which is very strange. and I've got a clip of that, but it's not in this presentation. Some general or military high-up dude rings up and says, there's 4 hijacked planes in the air, get on it. NORAD, the FAA and everyone else spend 1 or 2 hours looking for these non-existent planes, but they're not there. Nothing is scrambled. In fact, I've got a recording from one of the pilots that was eventually scrambled after about an hour, and he said they weren't given any targets. He actually says this, and he said what they did was they escorted existing flights to the ground to make sure they didn't go off anywhere else. That was their mission. He chose that mission because he wasn't given any targets. I've got a recording of that from coast to coast from about 3 years ago. So nothing is scrambled because you can't actually see these planes. These planes are not on any real radar. All they're seeing is blips, which are fake for the military exercises. Everyone feels bad because these non-existent planes have managed to destroy the World Trade Center and part of the Pentagon. So no one will admit to anything because there's been a huge intelligence cock-up because nobody knows what's going on. Because what they've actually been subjected to is advanced technology of which they have absolutely no knowledge even exists. Okay. And the media then come in to cover over all the cracks. And that's done with this Al-Qaeda story, and that all gets put into place within 45 seconds of the second plane crash. Fox News has already solved 9/11 with the name of Osama bin Laden. 45 seconds after the second plane had crashed, his name was mentioned on Fox. Okay. So I've mentioned some things about the destruction of the World Trade Center, and that's what we're going to start to talk about a bit more. In other words, if the planes didn't destroy the World Trade Center, what did destroy it? And that's what we're going to look at in part 2. Thanks very much for listening.